They were icons, voices, faces, legends who defined generations. Fame gave them everything the world could offer except protection. In the shadows of the 1980s and 90s, a silent epidemic was tearing through Hollywood, stealing lives while fear and stigma buried the truth. These are the stories they didn't want told, of brilliance, secrecy, loss, and a virus that changed culture forever. Steven Stucker. Steven Stucker didn't need a punchline to be funny. The moment he appeared on screen, something electric happened. His eyes wide, his voice sharp, his energy barely contained. Comedy poured out of him like chaos with perfect timing. When Airplane took off in 1980, Stucker's rapid-fire one-liners as Johnny, the unhinged air traffic controller, stole every scene. He wasn't the lead. He was the spark, the kind audiences remembered long after the credits rolled. Behind that fearless humor was a man who lived just as intensely as he performed. Stucker thrived in extremes, loud laughter, manic brilliance, and a desperate hunger to be seen. In San Francisco's theater scene, he honed a style that was bold, unpredictable, and unapologetically himself. Hollywood noticed, but Hollywood also hesitated. Stucker didn't fit neatly into a box, and boxes were everything. In 1984, his life changed forever. Steven Stucker tested positive for HIV, at a time when the diagnosis felt like a death sentence and silence was the norm. But Stucker refused to disappear quietly. In a move that shocked the industry, he spoke openly about his status, becoming one of the first actors to put a public human face on a disease surrounded by fear and misinformation. As his health declined, the phone stopped ringing. The laughter faded, yet his spirit didn't. Even as AIDS ravaged his body, Stucker faced it with the same raw honesty that defined his comedy. On April 13, 1986, he died at just 38 years old. Steven Stucker was more than a cult comedy icon. He was a warning, a pioneer, and a reminder. Sometimes the loudest laughs come from people fighting the quietest battles. Joel Crothers. Joel Crothers was the kind of actor television trusted. Handsome without being flashy, commanding without shouting, he carried himself with a quiet authority that made audiences lean in. From Broadway at just 14 to decades of daytime television, Crothers became a familiar presence in American living rooms, steady, reliable, unforgettable. On soap operas like The Edge of Night, Dark Shadows, and Somerset, he mastered the art of emotional precision, bringing depth to characters who lived. But while his career unfolded in the spotlight, Crothers lived a life carefully divided. Privately, he was openly gay among friends and colleagues he trusted. Publicly, he remained silent, not out of shame, but survival. In an era when being honest could end a career overnight, silence was protection. At one point, he even became engaged to his on-screen love interest, a move that blurred the line between truth and performance, leaving behind questions that were never fully answered. In the early 1980s, as AIDS began to devastate the entertainment industry, Joel Crothers was diagnosed with the disease. He did not go public. He did not turn himself into a headline. Instead, he chose dignity, continuing to work as long as his body allowed, determined to be remembered for his craft, not his illness. On November 6, 1985, Joel Crothers died from AIDS-related lymphoma. He was only 44 years old. His death passed quietly, without scandal or spectacle. His legacy remains etched into television history, a reminder of an entire generation of performers who gave audiences everything while carrying their hardest truths alone. Wade Dominguez. Wade Dominguez looked like a star before Hollywood ever decided he was one. Striking, magnetic, impossible to ignore. He had the kind of presence casting directors search for and audiences instantly believe. Before the cameras, before the premieres, he danced go-go in nightclubs. chasing a dream with nothing but rhythm, ambition, and raw hunger. His breakthrough came in Dangerous Minds, 1995. As Emilio Ramirez, the tough, guarded student slowly cracking open, Dominguez delivered something rare: vulnerability without sentimentality. The performance landed. Hollywood noticed. Roles followed in City of Industry, Shadow of Doubt, The Taxman. He wasn't famous yet, but he was close, very close. Then came the diagnosis. Wade Dominguez was living with AIDS at a time when the industry quietly erased people like him. He chose privacy. No interviews, no public confessions, no advocacy tour. He wanted the work to speak louder than the illness. As his health worsened, his career slowed. Opportunities evaporated. The promise of next big thing dissolved into hospital rooms and silence. In his final days, actress Elizabeth Berkley visited him, bringing an early cut of The Taxman. Watching himself on screen, Dominguez reportedly broke down. "I'm so good," he said through tears. "I'm so good." On August 26, 1998, Wade Dominguez died from respiratory failure. He was just 32 years old. Hollywood moved on. But his performance remains, a glimpse of what could have been, and a brutal reminder of how many futures were stolen before they ever had the chance to arrive. Paul Shenar. Paul Shenar had a voice you didn't forget. Deep, controlled, carrying danger even in silence. When he played Alejandro Sosa in Scarface, he wasn't just a villain, he was gravity itself. Calm, calculating, lethal. In a film crowded with excess, Shenar stood still, and that made him terrifying. But Paul Shenar was never chasing celebrity. As a founding member of the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, he earned deep respect long before Hollywood came calling. On stage, he was electric. On screen, he was precise. Every word mattered. Every pause carried weight. Yet behind that commanding presence was a man who lived carefully, quietly. In an era when being openly gay could end a career overnight, Shenar guarded his private life with near-military precision. Rumors circulated, most notably about a long-term relationship with actor Jeremy Brett, but nothing was ever confirmed. Silence, again, was survival. As the AIDS crisis swept through the arts community in the late 1980s, Paul Shenar became one of its many unspoken casualties. Diagnosed with AIDS, he did not go public. There were no interviews, no statements, no headlines. He faded from the screen while his peers and audiences were left wondering where he had gone. On October 11, 1989, Paul Shenar died from AIDS-related complications. He was 53 years old. His death passed with far less noise than his talent deserved. Paul Shenar proved that power doesn't always come from volume. Sometimes it comes from control. And sometimes the strongest performances are the ones history almost forgets. Anthony Perkins. Anthony Perkins was never meant to be a monster, yet the world never stopped seeing him as one. When Psycho shattered audiences in 1960, Perkins' Norman Bates redefined fear. Terror lived behind his eyes. The role made him immortal and trapped him there forever. Off-screen, Perkins carried a far heavier burden. In an era when Hollywood demanded rigid masculinity and punished difference, he lived in constant conflict with his sexuality. He loved men in secret, dated women in public, and endured relentless pressure to appear normal. Studios arranged dates. Rumors followed. Fear became routine. At one point, he even underwent conversion therapy, an attempt to erase himself to survive the industry. In 1973, Perkins married photographer Barry Berenson. They had 2 sons, and he was, by many accounts, a devoted husband and father. Yet friends later said the inner tension never disappeared. The gap between who he was and who he was allowed to be shaped his performances, adding depth, fragility, and unease to every role he touched. In the late 1980s, Perkins was diagnosed with HIV, learning the truth not from a doctor, but from a tabloid preparing to expose him. Control was taken from him one final time. He chose silence. He kept working. He refused to let illness define his ending. On September 12, 1992, Anthony Perkins died from AIDS-related pneumonia at 60 years old. The irony is cruel. A man remembered for portraying fear spent much of his life living inside it. Yet his legacy endures, not just as Norman Bates, but as a symbol of how many artists were forced to perform even when the cameras were off. Denholm Elliott. While Hollywood chased leading men and marquee names, Elliott mastered something far more rare: presence. He could steal an entire scene from actors twice as famous. You may not always remember his name, but you always remembered his face. Elliott survived 3 brutal years as a prisoner of war during World War II. That experience left marks no role could ever show, but it gave him depth. After the war, he turned to the stage, discovering that acting wasn't about being seen, but about being felt. Over the course of his career, Elliott appeared in more than 125 films and television productions. From the absent-minded charm of Marcus Brody in Indiana Jones, to the sly elegance of Coleman in Trading Places, to the tender warmth of A Room with a View, he brought intelligence and humanity to every role. He elevated everything he touched. Off-screen, Elliott lived with the same restraint that defined his performances, bisexual in a time that offered little understanding or acceptance. He married twice, raised children, and navigated a world that demanded discretion over honesty. In 1987, Denholm Elliott was diagnosed with HIV. He did not retreat. He did not make announcements. His final roles carried a quiet gravity, as if he understood time was closing in. On October 6, 1992, Denholm Elliott died from AIDS-related tuberculosis at the age of 70. The British film community mourned deeply. BAFTA later established the Denholm Elliott Award in his honor, fitting for a man who proved that greatness doesn't need center stage. Sometimes it lives in the margins, quietly unforgettable. Howard Ashman. Howard Ashman didn't just write songs, he gave animated characters souls. Before audiences ever knew his name, they were already feeling his words. Ashman understood one truth better than most: music works best when it tells the emotional story no one dares to say out loud. His rise began in the theater world, where he co-created Little Shop of Horrors, a dark, funny, painfully human musical about ambition, hunger, and consequence. When Disney brought Ashman and composer Alan Menken on to The Little Mermaid, animation changed forever. Songs like Part of Your World weren't just catchy, they were confessions. Ariel didn't want legs, she wanted to belong. Ashman was the architect of the Disney Renaissance, even if the spotlight rarely found him. He infused Broadway storytelling into animation, insisting that songs push plot and reveal character. Beauty and the Beast followed, deeper and darker, shaped by Ashman's belief that fear of the other was society's most dangerous instinct. During production, Howard Ashman was diagnosed with AIDS. As his health rapidly declined, he kept writing. From hospital rooms and borrowed time, he poured everything he had left into his work. His lyrics became sharper, more urgent, more alive. The mob song echoed real-world hysteria. Aladdin, his final project, carried joy, but also freedom, reinvention, themes he understood intimately. Howard Ashman died on March 14, 1991, at just 40 years old. Most children who grew up singing his songs never knew his name or his fight, but his legacy is everywhere. Howard Ashman proved that even in silence, a voice can change culture forever. Robert Reed. To millions of Americans, Robert Reed was the perfect father. As Mike Brady on The Brady Bunch, he embodied warmth, wisdom, and moral certainty, the steady center of a television family that felt impossibly wholesome. Trained as a serious actor with classical ambitions, Reed often felt trapped by the very role that made him famous. He clashed frequently with producers, frustrated by what he saw as shallow scripts and simplistic storytelling. But the deepest conflict was personal. Robert Reed was a gay man in a Hollywood that offered no mercy for honesty. In 1954, he married Marilyn Rosenberger, and they had a daughter together. The marriage ended years later, quietly. Reed had confided his sexuality to his wife, but publicly he remained closeted, knowing that exposure could erase his career overnight. The cost of secrecy was constant vigilance and loneliness. Despite tensions on set, Reed cared deeply for the cast of The Brady Bunch, mentoring the child actors and exposing them to culture, art, and music. Off-camera, he was thoughtful, generous, and complex. Nothing like the cardboard version of masculinity television required him to play. In 1991, Reed was diagnosed with colon cancer. What the public didn't know, and wouldn't learn until after his death, was that he was also HIV positive. At the time, stigma still ruled. Robert Reed died on May 12, 1992, at 59 years old. His life exposed a painful truth. Sometimes the people who teach us about honesty are the ones who were never allowed to live it themselves. This Christmas, as lights glow and families gather, which story touched you the most? Leave a Noel in the comments and tell us who you're remembering tonight. Pedro Zamora. Pedro Zamora never planned to be a symbol, but history chose him anyway. He was young, articulate, fearless, and painfully aware that time was not on his side. Diagnosed with HIV at just 17 years old, Zamora came of age during a moment when the virus was still misunderstood, demonized, and whispered about in fear. Instead of hiding, he did something radical. He spoke. An immigrant from Cuba who grew up in Miami, Pedro was openly gay in a world that often punished honesty. When HIV entered his life, it didn't silence him. It sharpened him. He turned classrooms into platforms, conversations into weapons against ignorance, and his own body into undeniable proof that AIDS was not a rumor or a moral failure, but a human reality. In 1994, Pedro stepped into uncharted territory when he joined The Real World San Francisco. He wasn't just another cast member, he was a cultural earthquake. Millions of Americans watched him live, laugh, argue, fall in love, and slowly grow weaker. For the first time, HIV had a face that wasn't anonymous, wasn't distant, and couldn't be ignored. One of the most powerful moments in reality television history came when Pedro held a commitment ceremony with his partner, Sean Sasser. Two men, on national television, in the 1990s. It was tender, joyful, and revolutionary. As filming ended, his health collapsed rapidly. Just hours after the final episode aired, Pedro Zamora died on November 11, 1994. He was only 22 years old, but his impact outlived him. President Bill Clinton later said Pedro had put a human face on AIDS, and that face changed minds, policies, and lives. Ed Koch. Ed Koch was New York, loud, combative, unapologetic. As mayor from 1978 to 1989, he ruled the city with a clenched fist and a sharp tongue, asking strangers on the street his trademark question, "How am I doing?" To supporters, he was the man who helped pull New York back from bankruptcy and decay. To critics, he was arrogant, dismissive, and blind. Nowhere was that tension more explosive than during the AIDS crisis. As the epidemic tore through New York's gay community in the 1980s, activists accused Koch of moving too slowly, of treating AIDS as a political inconvenience rather than a humanitarian emergency. Hospitals overflowed. People died alone. Fear ruled. Playwright and activist Larry Kramer famously accused Koch of having blood on his hands, calling him a mayor who looked away while his own constituents vanished. Rumors about Coke's sexuality followed him for decades, rumors he never confirmed nor denied. He insisted his private life was not up for discussion. To many, that silence felt like betrayal. To Coke, it was self-preservation in a world that punished vulnerability. Yet history is rarely simple. Coke did support anti-discrimination measures, banned bias in city employment, and later backed LGBTQ+ rights legislation. After his death in 2013, journalist Charles Kaiser confirmed what many had long believed: Ed Coke was gay. The revelation reframed everything. Ed Coke died at 88, leaving behind a legacy as divided as the city he loved. He was neither villain nor hero, but a reminder of how fear, politics, and identity can shape history in devastating ways. In the age of AIDS, Ed Coke stood at the center of power and the center of controversy. Steve Rubel. Steve Rubel didn't just open a nightclub, he engineered a fantasy. When Studio 54 opened its doors in 1977, New York didn't simply party there, it escaped there. Under a ceiling that glittered like a private galaxy, celebrities, artists, socialites, and total strangers collided in a space where rules dissolved and excess was currency. Rubel understood something fundamental about desire. People don't just want music, they want to belong to a moment. As co-founder of Studio 54, Rubel curated chaos with precision. His infamous door policy wasn't about money or fame, it was about energy. The key to a good party, he said, is filling a room with people more interesting than you. On any given night, Andy Warhol might sip champagne next to Liza Minnelli while Mick Jagger danced beside a plumber from Queens. It was democratic decadence, and it defined an era. In 1978, the IRS raided Studio 54. Rubel and his partner Ian Schrager were convicted of tax evasion, bringing the disco dream crashing down. Prison replaced champagne. Flashbulbs gave way to silence. When Rubel returned, he pivoted, helping reinvent boutique hotels and proving his instincts extended far beyond nightlife. Still, the myth of Studio 54 followed him everywhere. As AIDS ravaged New York's creative community, Rubel kept his illness private. He continued to socialize, to work, to perform normalcy, until his body could no longer keep pace with the life he had built. The man who once controlled the world's most exclusive guest list now faced the most isolating disease of his generation. Steve Rubel died on July 25, 1989, at just 45 years old. Studio 54 eventually closed, but its legend never did. He wasn't just a club owner, he was the architect of an era defined by freedom, illusion, and excess. And like so many before him, he was swallowed by the silence that followed when the music stopped. Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn built his life on power and destroyed others with it. Brilliant, ruthless, and relentlessly ambitious, he rose to national prominence before most people finished law school. At just 23, Cohn became chief counsel to Senator Joseph McCarthy during the Red Scare, helping orchestrate one of the darkest witch hunts in American history. Careers were ruined, lives were shattered, fear became policy, and Roy Cohn thrived. He didn't just prosecute alleged communists, he helped fuel the Lavender Scare, arguing that gay men and women were national security risks who deserved to be purged from government. For decades, rumors followed Roy Cohn about his sexuality, his private relationships, his closeness to men like David Shine. Cohn denied everything with venom. In public, he was aggressively heterosexual, loudly moralistic, and violently opposed to the very people he was rumored to be one of. Power to Cohn was armor. Even as his health collapsed, he refused the truth. He claimed he had liver cancer. He lashed out at doctors. To the end, he denied being gay, denied having AIDS, denied vulnerability of any kind. Roy Cohn died on August 2, 1986, at 59 years old, alone, disgraced, and stripped of the power he worshipped. His life stands as one of history's most chilling contradictions, a man who destroyed others for who they were, undone by the very truth he spent a lifetime denying. Roy Cohn didn't just shape an era of fear, he became its final casualty. Freddie Mercury. Freddie Mercury wasn't just a rock star, he was pure electricity. With a 4-octave voice, fearless flamboyance, and absolute control of the stage, he turned every Queen performance into spectacle. Born Farrokh Bulsara, an immigrant and outsider, he reinvented himself with precision and defiance, becoming one of the most iconic performers in music history. Behind the larger-than-life persona was a deeply private man. Mercury loved intensely and loyally, sharing an unbreakable bond with Mary Austin, whom he called his soulmate, and later finding quiet strength in Jim Hutton. Fame gave him power on stage, but it also forced him to guard his personal life fiercely. In 1987, Freddie Mercury was diagnosed with HIV. At a time when fear and stigma ruled the media, he chose silence, not denial, but control. Even as his health declined, his creativity exploded. He recorded relentlessly, often pushing himself beyond physical limits, determined to leave nothing unfinished. The album Innuendo became his final act of artistic defiance. His last appearance in These Are the Days of Our Lives was devastating in its restraint. A frail figure staring directly into the camera, saying goodbye without words. On November 23, 1991, Mercury publicly confirmed he had AIDS. Less than 24 hours later, he was gone. He was 45 years old. His death shattered silence around the world. But Freddie Mercury didn't disappear. He became immortal. The voice may be gone, but the echo will never fade. Andre Nepela. Andre Nepela skated like he belonged to another world. Elegant, precise, almost unreal. He moved across the ice with a calm authority that made difficulty look effortless. Long before figure skating embraced showmanship, Nepela mastered purity. Every jump was clean, every spin exact. In an era dominated by political pressure and rigid expectations, he let perfection speak for him. Born in Czechoslovakia, Nepela began skating at 7, originally to help treat his asthma. What started as therapy quickly became destiny. By his early teens, he was competing internationally, drawing attention for his discipline and classical style. The medals followed: 3 world championships, 5 European titles, and finally, Olympic gold at the 1972 Winter Games in Sapporo. At just 21, he stood at the absolute peak of his sport. Off the ice, Nepela was intensely private. In the Eastern Bloc, where being openly gay was unthinkable, discretion wasn't a choice, it was survival. Rumors circulated quietly within skating circles, but Nepela never addressed them. He focused on control, on craft, on keeping his inner life sealed off from the public eye. After retiring in 1973, he toured professionally and later became a respected coach in Germany, continuing to shape the sport from behind the scenes. In 1989, Andre Nepela died at just 38 years old from cancer of the lymph nodes, widely speculated to be linked to AIDS, though never publicly confirmed. Like many before him, his final chapter was wrapped in silence. His death shocked the skating world, but his legacy endures on the ice itself. Andre Nepela didn't demand attention, he earned it. And even decades later, his elegance still lingers, frozen in time. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was Hollywood's perfect leading man, tall, handsome, and effortlessly masculine. In the 1950s and 60s, films like Giant and Magnificent Obsession turned him into a symbol of American romance and strength. He wasn't just a star, he was an ideal carefully built by the studio system. Behind that image, Hudson lived a double life. He was a gay man in an industry where truth could end a career overnight. Studios controlled rumors, staged relationships, and even arranged his 1955 marriage to Phyllis Gates to protect the illusion. Within Hollywood, his sexuality was quietly known. To the public, it was unspoken. By the mid-1980s, Hudson's health began to fail. In 1984, he was diagnosed with AIDS, a disease still wrapped in fear and misinformation. At first, he stayed silent. But when his frail appearance sparked speculation, Hudson made a historic choice. On July 25, 1985, he publicly confirmed his diagnosis, becoming the first major Hollywood star to do so. The impact was immediate and enormous. AIDS was no longer distant or abstract. It had a familiar face. Public awareness surged. Conversations changed. Rock Hudson died on October 2, 1985, at 59 years old. In the end, the man forced to live behind a mask became the one who helped break the silence and changed history forever. Brad Davis. Brad Davis burned bright and fast. When Midnight Express exploded in 1978, Davis's raw, ferocious performance as Billy Hayes stunned audiences and critics alike. He didn't play suffering. He dragged viewers straight into it. The role earned him a Golden Globe and instant stardom. Raised in a turbulent home marked by alcoholism and instability, Davis carried his demons with him into adulthood. Fame magnified everything: ambition, addiction, self-destruction. Rather than chase heroic roles, he gravitated toward complex, uncomfortable characters, including his fearless turn in Corel, which cemented his status as a gay icon even as it complicated his mainstream career. Privately, Davis lived between contradictions. He was married to Susan Blakely, they had a daughter together, and by many accounts he loved his family deeply. Yet he also struggled with addiction, pressure, and identity in an industry that punished vulnerability. Hollywood admired his talent, but never fully knew what to do with him. In 1985, Brad Davis was diagnosed with AIDS. Terrified of stigma and career erasure, he kept the diagnosis secret while undergoing experimental treatments. As his health declined, so did his opportunities. The industry that once celebrated his bravery grew quiet. On September 8, 1991, at just 41 years old, Brad Davis took his own life, a decision his wife later said was made to spare his family from watching his final decline. Brad Davis was more than a tragic headline. His performances remain uncomfortable, electric, unforgettable, proof that he lived and worked without compromise, even when the cost was everything. This Christmas, which story stayed with you the longest? Subscribe to the channel, share a name below, and leave a Merry Christmas to remember them with us. Wishing you a warm, meaningful, and peaceful Christmas.